The Ottoman Empire, a powerful and enigmatic force that spanned centuries, is often remembered for its grandeur and opulence. Yet behind the magnificence lies a dark history that many have forgotten or chosen to ignore. Among its most shadowed aspects was the treatment of male concubines in the imperial harem, subjected to unfathomable cruelty that, for the most part, was seen as an ordinary part of their existence. These concubines, often young, were forced to endure horrific practices, not only as servants and sexual partners, but as disposable pawns in a political game of power, lust, and intrigue. They were seen as potential sources of power men who could father heirs and secure the future of the empire. The process was carried out in such a way that the victim's very identity was stripped away. We'll examine how these men were selected, what their lives were like in the harem, and how they navigated a world that saw them as nothing more than tools for power. The horrors they faced were not just physical, they were psychological. The very essence of their masculinity was erased in the name of political control. In the Ottoman court, power was everything, and the presence of potent male figures within the harem was considered a threat. By removing their ability to father children, the Sultan ensured that these men could not challenge his heirs. We'll discuss the physical aspects of the operation, the psychological impact on the concubines, and the ways in which the practice reinforced the Sultan's absolute power. Castration, in this sense, was not merely a means of emasculation. It was an assertion of dominance and an integral part of the political machinery that allowed the Ottoman Empire to maintain its strength and stability. Furthermore, the physical mutilation of their bodies symbolized their complete surrender to the ruler's will. The message was clear: no one, not even the most powerful man, could ever escape the Sultan's control. Men who had once been dignified leaders or soldiers from their native lands were reduced to faceless, emasculated bodies whose only purpose was to serve their ruler in ways that violated the most basic human rights. It sent a message to the entire empire and its subjects that the Sultan's power was absolute. The male concubines were reduced to shadows of their former selves, and their identities both, as men and as individuals, were erased. Their lives became a quiet, tragic symbol of the Sultan's dominance, as they existed solely to satisfy his needs. It was a ritual, deeply ingrained in the political and social fabric of the empire, one that embodied the empire's complex relationship with power, gender, and control. Castration was seen as a necessary step in making the male concubine completely subservient to the Sultan's desires, removing any threat they posed to his power or legacy. Yet ironically, the very essence of their value was also the root of their suffering. As potential fathers of future rulers, their very masculinity was seen as a threat to the Sultan's authority. The power they held in their bodies was something that could not be allowed to rival the Sultan's reign. While some men were chosen specifically for this fate, others fell victim to it over time as part of their punishment, or as a way to ensure loyalty to the Sultan. Male concubines who failed to please their masters, or who became too ambitious, were subjected to this extreme punishment. In some cases, the operation was performed in a crude, barbaric manner, with little regard for the concubine's survival. The high mortality rate due to infections or botched surgeries was common. Yet the practice continued for centuries without significant reform or remorse. This fear gave rise to the practice of castration, a horrifying procedure that ensured these men would never father children or challenge the Sultan's reign. In the pursuit of power and influence, the Sultans would do anything, including the brutal castration of these men, to serve a system that stripped them of their masculinity, reducing them to mere vessels for their ruler's desires. These horrifying acts weren't isolated incidents, they were systematic, ingrained in the very structure of the Ottoman court. For centuries, these men lived and died in the shadows, their agony part of the fabric that held the empire together. Today we'll explore how such atrocities became normalized, and what it reveals about the Ottoman Empire's view on power, gender, and human dignity. The Ottoman harem is a concept that has long fascinated historians and scholars alike. While most associate harems with women, the concubines, wives, and eunuchs who served at the pleasure of the Sultan, the reality was far more complex and at times harrowing. Within the sprawling confines of the imperial harem, men played an integral, but often overlooked role, serving not as equals but as mere instruments in the hands of the Sultan and his powerful court. Unlike the women who were kept within the harem to bear children, entertain, or secure political alliances. The male concubines were often seen as a political commodity. The Sultan's desire to expand his influence extended beyond military conquests and alliances. The young men chosen to serve in the harem were frequently brought from foreign lands, and many of them were slaves. Captured from Christian territories or purchased from the slave markets that flourished across Europe, Africa, and Asia. The harem, a space typically seen as an inner sanctum of female allure, was in fact a breeding ground for manipulation, power plays, and unspeakable cruelty, especially toward the male concubines. But what made these male concubines so valuable to the Sultan? The male concubine's body became the symbol of ultimate control, a sacrifice made for the good of the empire as it was believed. In this section, we'll delve deeper into the practices surrounding male concubinage in the Ottoman Empire. Castration was not an isolated act of violence in the Ottoman Empire. The process of castration was brutal and often deadly. To understand the full scope of this atrocity, one must consider the political implications of castration. But castration was not just a physical act. It was symbolic. This section will explore how the process of castration was not just an isolated act of violence, but a central part of the empire's system of control. The psychological toll of castration on the male concubines was profound, and the consequences went far beyond the physical pain they endured. For many, their journey to the harem began with the promise of power, prestige, or wealth. What awaited them was a life of humiliation, terror, and complete subjugation. The psychological trauma inflicted by castration was not just an immediate consequence of the act itself. It was also the slow unraveling of the concubine's sense of self-worth and masculinity. The physical deformity was a constant reminder of their forced servitude, symbol of their reduced status in a world where their masculinity once defined their value. Psychological disintegration often set in as these men grappled with their new identities. Some men, unable to reconcile their new reality, descended into depression or insanity. We'll delve into the trauma they experienced, both physical and emotional, and how it shaped their lives. Castrated men were not just helpless victims of an oppressive system. They were, in many ways, active participants in the empire's complex web of power dynamics. Despite their emasculation, these men played crucial roles in maintaining the Sultan's dominance, often serving as advisors, spies. Some concubines became so influential that they served as intermediaries between the Sultan and foreign dignitaries. Handling delicate diplomatic matters and even influencing state policy, they were often caught in the middle of power struggles within the harem, where rival factions of concubines and palace officials fought for favor with the Sultan. The castrated men, although physically emasculated, were far from powerless in this environment. They used their positions to gain influence and manipulate the court to their advantage. However, their actions were always limited by the unspoken rules of the system. Despite their prominence, they remained fundamentally subjugated, dependent on the whim of the Sultan for their survival. However, despite their relative power, their position was always precarious. We'll examine how these men, despite their tragic fate, were deeply involved in the inner workings of the court, and how their power was both a privilege and a curse. The way in which these men navigated the empire's political labyrinth will be analyzed, shedding light on their complex relationship with power, loyalty, and survival. They were aware that their status could be revoked at any moment, and the Sultan had the ultimate authority to dispose of them if they became a threat. In intermediaries within the harem and the wider political sphere, the role of the concubines in the Ottoman power structure, and how their identity was violently altered, will also be explored. This traumatic process was not just a form of punishment. It was a way to reinforce the hierarchy of power within the empire, ensuring that the Sultan's word was law and that no one would dare challenge him. Others turned to submission, becoming willing participants in their fate, as a way to maintain some semblance of control over their otherwise powerless lives. Castration in the Ottoman Empire was not merely a matter of physical mutilation. It was a violent severing of identity. Some were promoted to positions of influence, serving as confidants to the Sultan, and even rising to significant political power within the empire. Many were tasked with overseeing the female concubines in the harem, while others were given the responsibility of managing the empire's vast territories. Despite being eunuchs, They were still seen as a valuable part of the Sultan's inner circle, primarily because their loyalty was guaranteed by their physical condition. With no heirs to father, these men were perceived as entirely loyal to the Sultan's cause, and their power stemmed from this perceived loyalty. These men were often once prominent or respected in their native lands, capable of wielding power, authority, and dignity. To be selected and brought to the harem was already a grave injustice, but the castration that awaited many of them stripped away their very essence. The very act of castration reinforced the idea that the Sultan and his court were the ultimate arbiters of human value. To be castrated was to be completely dehumanized, and this process was not just a punishment, it was a political tool, meant to demonstrate the vast gulf between the Sultan and his subjects. The concubines, while technically slaves, were in many ways pawns in a larger game of political manipulation. They were stripped of any power or autonomy, ensuring that they were nothing more than tools for the pleasure and control of the Sultan. The loss of their manhood symbolized a total loss of personal agency and freedom. They were no longer men in the traditional sense, and they became trapped in a cycle of psychological torment, their very existence defined by the scar left on their bodies. For the castrated men, the trauma was compounded by the dissonance between their bodies and their minds. But this trauma was not just confined to the men who were castrated. In this section, we'll examine the psychological impact of castration on the male concubines. While the physical and psychological toll on the male concubines was immense, it is also important to understand their role in the political machinery of the Ottoman Empire. Once castrated, the concubines became part of a highly stratified social system within the Ottoman court. The men who rose through the ranks of the court were often highly educated and had a keen understanding of the empire's political landscape. One of the most fascinating aspects of the castrated men's role was their ability to navigate the treacherous world of Ottoman politics. In this section, we'll explore the political roles that castrated men played within the Ottoman Empire. Castrated men, while deeply embedded in the power structures of the Ottoman Empire, were also subject to a unique social and cultural perception that set them apart from both men and women. Castrated men, having been robbed of their masculinity, were, in the eyes of many, reduced to something less than human. Despite their critical roles in the Sultan's court, they were not truly free agents. They were often seen as the ultimate sacrifice, individuals whose entire lives were shaped by their lack of agency, though many of these men were reduced to silent, suffering figures in the annals of history. Their roles in shaping the empire's power structure cannot be underestimated. Over the centuries, these men influenced everything from palace politics to foreign diplomacy, and yet their story remains largely untold. This section aims to bring to light their contributions, struggles, and the lasting impact they had on the empire, as well as how their legacy is viewed in the context of modern-day interpretations of history. The castrated men's social standing within the broader Ottoman society was marked by a strange dichotomy. The castrated men were a stark reminder of the brutal lengths to which the sultans would go to maintain their reign and secure their legacy. In modern interpretations, their story serves as a cautionary tale about the dehumanizing effects of absolute power, a reminder that even the most powerful rulers are often willing to sacrifice the dignity of their subjects in the name of control. These men, who lived in the shadows of the sultan's reign, became symbols of both loyalty and emasculation. We'll examine how their influence can still be seen in modern depictions of the empire, and how their story challenges our understanding of power, subjugation, and sacrifice. Through this analysis, we'll gain insight into the deep scars left by centuries of oppression, and how these men's stories can help us better understand the dark side of imperial power. The imperial court's reliance on castrated men for maintaining control over the harem and the larger state apparatus highlighted a deep-rooted insecurity about power, lineage, and control. By emasculating these men, the sultans ensured that no one in their court could potentially challenge their power through the creation of a new bloodline. The eunuchs were often used as pawns in a game of power that stretched across centuries. As with many figures in history, the eunuchs' roles have been romanticized or sensationalized, but their true impact on Ottoman society was far more complex. Figures like Mehmed Aga, a prominent eunuch during the reign of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, are testament to the potential for upward mobility within the hierarchical structures of the Ottoman court. These men, despite their mutilation, were able to wield significant power and influence, proving that, within the confines of their tragic circumstances, they were not entirely powerless. For centuries, they were at the center of imperial intrigue, playing vital roles in the empire's political and military strategies. On one hand, they were afforded some privileges due to their service to the Sultan. On the other hand, they were deeply ostracized because of their inability to participate in normal male functions like marriage or family life. They were often seen as incomplete men, void of the essential qualities that defined male identity. This perception, while deeply cruel, also carried an ironic twist, because they were incapable of fathering children. These men were viewed as loyal servants who would not pose a threat to the Sultan's reign. However, this loyalty was more a product of their mutilation than any natural affection for their ruler. They were in many ways seen as a class apart, neither fully male nor female, existing somewhere in a liminal space between the two. The act of castration was not only a physical mutilation, but a social mark that forever altered their place within Ottoman society. While some castrated men found ways to rise to positions of power, they were still viewed with suspicion and disdain, never fully accepted as either men or eunuchs. In Ottoman society, the concept of masculinity was tightly controlled. It was synonymous with power, fertility, and the ability to produce heirs. Culturally, the role of the castrated man was often portrayed as one of servitude and subjugation. In this section, we'll explore how Ottoman society viewed castrated men, examining both their elevated and degraded status. We'll look at how they were perceived in the context of the harem, their role in serving the Sultan, and how their lives were forever shaped by their emasculation. Through this exploration, we'll gain a deeper understanding of the social forces that shaped their existence and how they navigated a world that saw them as both vital and inconsequential. The legacy of the castrated men in Ottoman history is complex and deeply intertwined with the empire's political, cultural, and social fabric. While the Ottoman Empire itself has long since fallen, the image of the eunuch in historical literature, film, and popular culture has remained pervasive. The legacy of the male concubines and eunuchs is particularly important when considering how the Ottoman Empire, like many empires, structured its political and social hierarchies. Despite their apparent subjugation, some eunuchs managed to carve out legacies of their own, even achieving political influence. The legacy of the eunuchs, however, is not just about power or influence. It is about the human cost of political control. In this section, we'll reflect on the lasting legacy of these men in Ottoman history. As we look back on the horrific treatment of male concubines in the Ottoman Empire, we must not only examine the past, but also consider the lessons it offers for the present and future. While the Ottoman Empire no longer exists, the power dynamics and systems of control that defined its rule continue to shape our modern world. The practices of castration, emasculation, and subjugation of individuals may seem like a thing of the past. But the underlying forces that allowed these atrocities to take place, fear of loss of power, exploitation, and dehumanization, remain prevalent in many societies today. These men, once brought to the imperial harem with promises of prestige and dignity of all individuals, regardless of their gender, identity, or status. Despite the unimaginable hardships they faced, many of these men navigated a system designed to destroy them and found ways to influence the empire. Their story challenges us to think critically about the systems that govern our world, and to ensure that we never forget the human cost of power. In remembering them, we ensure that their experiences serve as a powerful reminder of the importance of human dignity and the fight for justice in a world that too often seeks to suppress both. The story of the male concubines is not just a history of cruelty, it is a powerful reminder of the need for empathy, justice, and equality in all aspects of life. By examining the past, we can better understand the dangers of unchecked power and work toward creating a world where no one is reduced to a mere object of control or exploitation, and wealth ultimately became the victims of a brutal system that stripped them of their identity, their autonomy, and their very humanity. Their suffering, however, was not in vain. It serves as a testament to the oppressive forces that shaped the empire, and the need to understand and confront the mechanisms of power that continue to exist in our world today. The story of the Ottoman male concubines serves as a powerful reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the consequences of a hierarchical system that treats individuals as expendable tools for political or personal gain, while their masculinity was forcibly erased. Their treatment highlights the broader issue of gender-based power imbalances that have persisted throughout history. We'll explore how their story can help us understand the dangers of dehumanization and what lessons we can apply to modern-day struggles for equality and human rights. The abuses suffered by these men are not just relics of history, they are part of an ongoing conversation about how we value human dignity and fight against oppression in all its forms. Whether in the harem or in the modern world, systems that seek to dominate or control based on gender or identity are built on a foundation of inequality. The history of the male concubines serves as a stark reminder that the abuse of power is often deeply intertwined with the manipulation of gender and identity. In contemporary politics, we still see individuals being reduced to mere objects, their voices silenced and their humanity stripped away in the name of control. The lesson here is clear. When we fail to recognize the inherent dignity of every individual, we open the door for exploitation and abuse. The consequences of ignoring this basic truth can be far-reaching and long-lasting, as history has shown us. Furthermore, the story of the male concubines underscores the importance of gender and identity in shaping societal roles. In this section, we'll reflect on how the treatment of male concubines in the Ottoman Empire has influenced contemporary views on power, control, and gender. The horrific practices of the Ottoman Empire, particularly the castration and abuse of male concubines, offer a chilling glimpse into the lengths to which absolute power can corrupt and dehumanize individuals. As we reflect on their lives, we are reminded of the need for vigilance in protecting the rights. The legacy of the Ottoman male concubines may be one of suffering, but it is also one of resilience,